Welcome to the show, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of the New Construction Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Anya Chrysanthon, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest for today. His name is Jeff Tippett, and Jeff is an entrepreneur, speaker, and an author. And we're very lucky to have him on the show today. He is the guru of communicating and persuasive speaking. So we can always learn a little bit about how can we be more effective with our communication, whether it's on our emails or in person. So anything we can do to try to convince people to buy those homes. So welcome to the show, Jeff. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I am honored and I'm excited to talk about persuasive communications, especially in this space as it relates to residential new construction. It's a personal love of mine. It's a background of mine. So I'm excited to talk and share. And I think we can bring some great ideas to the table that will definitely help your audience. So I appreciate the opportunity and I'm excited to talk about this.
Awesome. So let's jump right into it. And usually we like to start off by giving a quick bio introduction. So if you don't mind telling us a little bit about your company and, how did you get into this space?
Sure. So I go back to my childhood. I have always been an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is in my DNA. I vividly remember as a kid going and knocking on doors and getting gigs to rake yards and to mow yards, and then hiring my friends to come work and do those and process those contracts for me. So I've always been an entrepreneur. I've been in existing companies and been an entrepreneur, helping to start new things within different companies. I launched a nonprofit about a decade ago and built that up to make that stable. And then in 2014, I launched my public affairs and communications firm called Targeted Persuasion. I launched to do political work up front and to help persuade voters to elect different people. And it expanded into more public affairs, but stayed really true to my personal passion of persuading and moving people along. I launched my company in October of 2014, which was an election year. A month before the election. It was the worst time to launch a company in this space. However, my first week of putting my shingle out, I signed a half dozen clients. And then within the first quarter, I signed my first international client, which is this little teeny tiny company out of California called Airbnb.
Tiny little company. Never heard of it.
Never heard of it, right? So yeah, I got to do public affairs work for them and work a lot to persuade people in communities and elected officials on their behalf. So yeah, this is my background.
Well, that's pretty interesting. And all of us can use more persuasive communication. And I'm sure with your work with politicians, that's got to be a whole other story. I'm sure you have a ton of stories to tell us about that. We all see TV ads and of course, Facebook ads and everything else now. Trying to persuade us one way or the other, and sometimes they get a little dirty, right? It's not so, they don't always play nice. So I definitely like to touch on that and, what your opinion is of that. But congratulations on your latest book.
Yes,
so
I'm excited.
Your book is, let's see here, Unleashing Your Superpower, Why Persuasive Communication is the Only Force You Will Ever Need. I love the title and I love the artwork on it. It's pretty cool. So
thank you. I am so excited about this book. We are in the home stretches of this book. We are due to be out January 1st. So I'm writing my last few chapters right now. My editor is going through those. I'm excited. I use this title because as a kid, I was always thinking about my superpower and trying to pick out, whoa, if I could pick one superpower, what would it be, right? And I would think about flying and how cool that would be, to go instantly anywhere that I wanted to be. But then all of a sudden my mind would go to the Wonder Twins. I think, well, what if I had another person and we could form of and shape of and to do superpowers that way? So as a kid, I just couldn't settle. I want to be Spider-Man. I could not settle on what my superpower would be. And it was only as an adult, and especially going through an international adoption of a baby from Haiti, that I really began to understand the power of persuasive communications. And my big statement is this, is that we all live or die based upon our ability to persuade. I feel comfortable I can back that up. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO of a company, right? And this is not the 50s where you could just like crack a whip and move a company along. You need to persuade people, especially if you're working with millennials and anyone in that group. You have to understand how to persuade. If you're in sales, if you're a sales manager, if you're a salesperson, you of course have to understand. If you're in middle management and you have people on top of you or people below you, you have to constantly persuade if you answer the phones, or even if you just don't want to live alone for the rest of your life, right? We all have to be able to persuade. So that's why I'm really comfortable in saying that we all live or die based upon our ability to persuade others. So that's the focus of my book. I talk through like early stage, I tell the story of my superpower. I talk about my international adoption and the internal changes that happened there and what I learned about persuasion, and a lot about persuasion versus manipulation. You know, a lot of people think that persuasion and manipulation are the very same thing, but they're so different. And that's one of the things I love in this book, is helping people understand the difference there, because they're huge. They're totally different.
Yeah, so I love how you say that everyone needs the superpower. And so whether you're in sales or not, you know what, if you just want to convince your husband to go to a restaurant, right, to try that new super woo-woo place that all your girlfriend's been talking about, you got to be able to persuade him, right? What's in it for him?
That's exactly right. We all have to persuade. And it is extremely important, of course, for salespeople, but I do think my audience is extremely broad, because if you're involved in more than one person, you have to be able to persuade without manipulating.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. You mentioned specifically that if your company has a lot of millennials, that is particularly important. Why did you bring up millennials specifically?
A lot of people that are working with millennials have a very difficult time understanding this segment of our population. You know, oftentimes, you know, they're accused of being lazy, or they're accused of not being fully engaged, or they're accused of being transient. So I bring that up because millennials have such great energy and such great wisdom that they bring to the table. And they're such a valuable part of our workforce, but we have to work with them a little differently than we work with people with other groups. One of the things, especially as it goes back to manipulation versus persuasion, I think that millennials very much so abhor anything that looks like you're manipulating them, or you're not being transparent, or you're not being honest with them. And I think that is a beautiful gift that they bring to our workforce. I've learned a lot myself, and I have several millennials that work with my firm. I've learned a lot from them, understanding, as an employer, what I need to do to work with them, to persuade them, to be honest, to be transparent with them. I've learned that they actually love hearing about my failures, where in the past, maybe we were a little scared to talk about our failures. But my experience is like they welcome it. They want to see that side of me and understand, here's what happened, but also here's what I learned from that as well. So they're a major part of our workforce today, and they bring such great gifts to the table if we accept them for who they are and value them for what they're bringing to the table.
I just love this. So many great points you're making with you need to understand. So I recently attended a Builders Conference, and there was a huge emphasis on marketing to millennials, because millennials are a third of US population now, and they're pacing to actually outgrow baby boomer population by year 2019. So as you can imagine, for new home builders, that is a big focus, because now there's a big focus on marketing to them, because they are starting to finally buy the homes. They're moving out of the cities, starting families, etc. So I think it is crucial that we understand our messaging to the population that we're talking to, right? So specifically, number one thing you want to do as a sales rep is you really want to understand who is my target audience. Because once you understand that, the way you're going to communicate to them is going to be very different. So Jeff, if you don't mind, you touched a little bit about talking to millennials already, but what if my audience are baby boomers, right? We have a lot of downsizer communities, 55 plus. How would you target your message differently to baby boomers versus millennials?
Well, first of all, let me like draw one way that I would keep this consistent. So one way that I would keep it consistent regardless of the population is to understand like the pattern that we have to go through of know, like, and trust. Know, like, trust. And in any sales that we do, even if it's applying for a job, right? If it's getting a job, if it's that type of work, any sales that we do, we have to go through the know, like, trust with potential audiences. But what do I mean by that? First of all, we have to have awareness. We have to have our marketing collateral out there. We have to have our messaging out there. Now, the places we deliver it and the way we say it for millennials is probably going to look a lot different. The things that the value proposition that we bring to millennials could be a lot different than the older. We know that like with millennials, a lot of things around eco-friendly and around things that are protecting the environment are extremely important to that. So, and we also know that like where they live online, they're huge on Instagram, for example, right? That's where they love to hang out. They're likely not going to be on Twitter. For us, and I work with political candidates, the reporters and your politicians and your lobbyists, your news people, they're all on Twitter. That's where they live. That's their space. But we know that millennials love Instagram. I mean, they love sharing photos and they love sharing beautiful photos with one another. So understanding like what's important to them versus like the older population, what they might, and segmenting those messages out. One of the things we talk a lot about is how do we develop consistency across all of our messaging platforms, because the danger here is becoming like so segmented that it doesn't align, right? So we have to figure out what are our three core messaging, for example. Like we have three points that are extremely important to us. Great. Now, how do we then translate that over to millennials? How do we translate to different generations as well, but staying true? Because we can actually cause brand confusion if we try to switch our messaging too much in different populations and in different groups.
Love it. Love it. So, okay. So let's talk specifics. So say, for example, I work for a small custom builder who is passionate about giving back to the community, and they build green homes. And, we have several different communities that are not particularly targeted to one population or the other. And we do see that mix of both downsizers as well as young families moving into the area for the school district. So how could I position, like what could I concentrate on? Maybe let's talk about figuring out those three messages and how we can tweak it depending on who's in front of us.
So, for example, you bring up something really good. I love that you brought this up and mentioned it. Service, for example. So, if we know that service is extremely important to millennials, that's huge for millennials. So, for example, one way I would approach that is I wouldn't just post photos of my sales team and my office team out doing a service project for something that's important within the community. I would actually open that up to, for example, millennials that we're targeting, millennials that we're talking to, and invite them to come in. Because I think what can happen in situations like that, if you give them a chance to serve alongside your people and you build those relationships where you're not saying bye from me, but you're saying, here I am, I care about our community. We have, maybe it's around homelessness and maybe you're doing some work around that, or maybe it's food insecurity, whatever it happens to be. We're doing some work with millennials. I'm running a ballot initiative for open space, parks, and greenways. And we know those are extremely important. Another thing that we just saw in some polling was how much millennials love advocacy as well. So maybe it's not just, for example, going in and cleaning up a stream or something within a community. Maybe it's involved in reaching out to legislators or reaching out to city council members or county commissioners, right? So I think part of what they're looking for and the way that I would encourage people to reach them is don't just sell to them. Bring them into what you're doing. And at that point, you have a chance to build a relationship with them. And to go back to what I said earlier, that helps you so much to go through this know, like, and trust. So, for example, if there is a greenway, for example, with a river that needs to be cleaned up, and you do a service project and you invite them in, they're going to see your people. They get to know you. They're going to know that you care about the community, that you care about the environment. You're cleaning up. They're going to trust you. So in one day, right, you can take someone new and take them through all three of these just like that. And then the conversation organically and naturally evolves, in my opinion, to conversations around selling and buying and what all that looks like.
I am in love with what you're saying. And, you know, I love to go through builders' Instagram accounts because that's the space I'm in. I'm always looking for ideas. And you always see builders post about a certain community project that they were involved in and their picture of the team doing this or that. But oh my gosh, how much better would it be if you open that up to your community and said, hey, we're doing such so and so. If you want to get involved, contact us. So that number one, you're actually helping the community because you have more people involved in that. And two, you're actively engaging your target audience.
Yes,
So,
and this is
my
so
God.
different than just say come into an open house, right? Where you just know it's all about selling. I think it gives you a chance to really get to know people, to build a relationship. The one strong caution that I would encourage people to think through on this, and I have a chapter on my book called "Help Others Find Their Win, So You Win." Mm-hmm. And in this chapter, and I use a quote from Zig Ziglar that you'll get everything in life that you want if you first help others get what they want. So, but it's extremely important because sometimes understanding this, we still go back to a manipulation mindset of, okay, if I want to win millennials, I need to do a service project. So I'm going to go do the service project to make millennials happy, and then I'm going to sell a home and we win. No, it doesn't work that way. You really do need to care about your community. Like, you have to care about that project that's going on. If you're just there and it's a front to manipulate, they're going to get it. They're going to see through that with just like that. I mean, with clear eyes. So I encourage like attendees as I'm doing keynotes or if I'm doing webinars or seminars, I encourage them, check your heart first. Do you really care about your community? If it's, and make sure it aligns with your company. I'm not saying go far out to something, but you know, if it's cleaning up a project or if it's taking care of the poor or feeding, collecting food, whatever it happens to be, make sure it aligns with values that are internal to you so that it's true to you, it's true to your community. Millennials, they'll find truth there as well, but making sure that our heart's right? That we really do care. We're not manipulating, we care.
So it goes back to just being authentic, right? So you have to, and I think it's just now we're coming up against millennials that it's such a segment of the population that they can't see right through all the BS.
Yes.
Right?
Well, you just brought up a very important word. It's the word authentic. And I speak to people in these seminars and I always tell them, if you're trying to be authentic, stop, right? Because you're not.
There's no trying to be authentic.
Exactly. There is no trying to be. So I talk to people like, well, I'm trying to be authentic. I'm trying to be real. No, stop. Just be real. Just be transparent. It's not a journey. It's not some place to go. It's your heart. And it's where and how you value other people and how you care for other people. So yeah, if you're trying, stop. Right? Let's rethink this. Let's retool our brain. Let's head in a different direction. Be authentic, right? Follow this up to being authentic.
Yes. And so with this whole kind of a transparent, I guess, society where millennials are looking for authenticity, customer service and focus on your customer is even more important than ever before. And of course, now we live in the age of Zillow and the reviews and all that good stuff. So how, in your opinion, if we do have some of those positive reviews, for example, on for the builder, is that a good idea to showcase them to our buyers? And how do we do it tastefully without turning somebody off or sounding like an infomercial and giving them an impression that maybe it's Susie from, I don't know, Massachusetts really does not exist and we made it up. So how can we be authentic in that process? And
great. Yeah. So like you bring up customer service. And one thing that I think of with even with the communication side of that today is that modalities of customer service and modalities of feedback vary so much now. So it's not like call the 1-800 number anymore with this population, right? And everything just transpires over a phone. It could be a comment on an Instagram photo, for example, that gets unnoticed. that someone hasn't been paying attention to because they don't have alerts set up for comments and things that, things that are happening there. So it's multiple play, and even like following hashtags and things of that nature, so that you're part of the conversation. So I do think that the customer service is so different now, and it's fast paced. As well. This isn't like what I can wait 2 or 3 days and then get back with people. When they post something or they ask a question, they are looking for, for immediate responses. As far as like to your question too about customer service and posting some of these reviews, I think it helps if for example, if we're talking about Instagram or if we're talking about like a Facebook page, it's the frequency of posting things like this. So for example, in my case, for Twitter is a big social platform for me, and LinkedIn is as well. And so for me, I look at each platform, I handle it slightly differently, but for the most part, I will do 6 to 7 posts about something else great that someone else is doing to one that I may share about myself. And oftentimes, even my preference on that is to retweet someone else or to repost what someone else has said. And even if I'm the one initiating, yes, get the information out there, but I also like to point to something special about that person and all this as well. So I always look for the win-win in this. So it's not just about me pimping myself out there. Yeah, we need to tell our story. We need to be great at telling our story. But I think the frequency of how we balance out stories about others and other processes going on to pimping our story, and then how we frame it, right? And how we position that message. If we can couch that in as sharing something that someone else has already done, or we can find a way to point to the other person and something great about them, I think it kind of balances all that out.
Absolutely. You don't always want to toot your horn and use social media as like a broadcasting channel, right? It's a conversation, and how do you engage people in that conversation? So
that's the first word is social, right? Social media. We got to be social. It's got to be a conversation. And some of my best conversations that have happened have been like in comments, like when people say something, and especially if you're posting some things in Facebook, which is great because like people really connect with you in Facebook. Keeping the conversation going is extremely important to the algorithms in Facebook. They want to see the interactions in that. So making sure like every time someone posts something that there is a response to that. And if you could say something in a question or ask for clarification or something that points to something a little bit more out of them, especially on Facebook, the more you can get people talking, the better. The algorithms want to see 150 comments on a post, right? So we can get that happening. We can get more clarity. We can also learn a lot about our target market just by asking questions of them on platforms like that.
Bingo. I think that's one area where most builders underutilize it. And especially now with Instagram stories, you have an ability to do a survey. That's huge. So I think you can really get what people are looking for, whether it's in a model home, what would you rather have? It's a wild, wild west that is being underutilized right now, especially by the builders, because usually most builders are unfortunately a little bit behind on the whole adopting technology side of it. Now, you mentioned being manipulative versus being persuasive. So, and I think most people have, almost like that little dirty word, like sales is a little dirty word. So, and when you think about a salesperson, sales professional, a lot of the times it's a lot of negative feelings and emotions that are associated with that, because we think manipulation, we think twisting my hand into it, twisting my arm into it, we think sleazy. So, how can we persuade someone without manipulating them? Because at the end of the day, aren't we trying to get them to do something?
Yes, you're asking great questions. I love all this. So let's first talk a little bit about manipulation. Encyclopedia.com defines manipulation as to control or influence like a person or situation cleverly, unfairly, or unscrupulously. All right, I look at that and I think, yikes, who really wants to be part of that? Some popular synonyms are control, exploit, gerrymander, right? I look at all that and think, no way. So why do people manipulate? A couple of, I think, first of all, manipulation can be easier than persuasion. Persuasion takes a lot of relationship work, where manipulation is really just about forcing someone to do what it is that you want them to do. But as I advocate in a lot of my sales conferences, sure, if you're good at manipulation, if you're good at sales, you can probably close one deal, you can get it done, you can move on. But we all know in business that the cost of customer acquisition is one of the top expenses that we have for a company. So yes, we've all been on those calls on the phone where we would say yes just to hang up and get off of the phone. So the thing is, yes, you could probably manipulate, you might get something closed, but the thing is, you're not going to build this relationship with a person. So what ends up happening is it's a one-off deal, and they'll never come back to you. They'll never refer friends to you. For me, I would much rather have lifelong clients that as things happen in life, as things change. Now, if we manipulate, they're not coming back to us. But if we persuade, then we have the ability for them to come back. For me, I see this in gyms a lot of time, right? You sign up for that gym membership, and man, the manipulation begins with the training and all that kind of stuff. And I've walked out of gyms before and said, no, this isn't what I want. But when we look at persuasion, persuasion is defined as this way: is to cause someone to do something through reasoning or through argument. And the word argument here is more the original definition of two people presenting logical statements back and forth regarding their perspective, right? So this isn't like family Thanksgiving when people are talking politics over that. No, it's like really good dialogue that's happening between two people. The word persuasion comes from the Latin word that means, it has two parts, which means to move through to completion and then to advise. So how do you advise and move them through completion? So if, in this case, if we're talking to people and we know that purchasing a home is of interest to them, how do we then move them through? How do we advise them to the point that we come to the very same place? And at the end, what we look for here is that through these conversations, and I talk a lot about things like making it sticky, how you capture people's attention earlier, how you make a personal connection with people. I talk through all these in the different chapters of my book. But at the very end, you're to that point where you're in the same place and you haven't manipulated them to something that they don't want. And I always look for two words in conversations like this. I think there are two magical words that let me know if I have persuaded or manipulated. And those two words are, that's right. So when you're in a conversation with someone and you get there and you're at the end part of it and they say, yeah, that's right. You know that you have persuaded them, right? You brought them over to where you are. You've listened to them. You found that common ground, what that looks like. And that may look like different finishes or different ways that things could be done. And I talk some too in my book about binary versus non-binary options. Sometimes we're so focused on binary, yes, no, black, white, that we forget about non-binary options of all that's out there, and how do we find what you want, what I want, and how do we keep putting this puzzle together and playing jigsaw with this until it gets to the point that everyone is happy. And when you get to that point and they're like, that's right, you know that you're there. And you have persuaded, you've done your job as a salesperson, and that looks like your buyer being so excited about what it is that you've offered to them. And we're selling, when I buy a home, when I bought my most recent home, I didn't just buy a home. I bought a place for my family memories to take place. Right? I'm building my family. I just put a hot tub in. This weekend, we had friends over. My kids were in the hot tub. We were all hanging out. Do I care about the price I pay for this house? Absolutely not. What I care about is what's going on in the life that I'm living here with my family and with my friends.
All right. So now if we are on the right path and we want to persuade people, are there certain rules that we could kind of check off in our heads that, okay, I need to do X, Y, and Z in order to successfully persuade someone?
Yes. So, and kind of walking through some of the chapters in my book. First of all, I think one of the places that we mess up at the very beginning is in our messaging and how we say what it is that we want to say. And whether it's selling a home or whether it's policy prescriptions, oftentimes we are like out there with all of this grandiose. And one of the things that I help my clients as I work with them, and I have a chapter in my book on this, is how do you craft a simple message, right? There's so many complications. And I also talk about like an inverted funnel in messaging, right? Where you start with just the basics, like this isn't a time, especially as it relates to social media and communicating on social media, this isn't a time when people are going to give you 2, 3, or 4 minutes. They're going to give you seconds. When I work with clients on messaging, this sounds unbelievable. I don't work page to page or paragraph to paragraph or sentence to sentence. I literally work word to word. How do I say one word that evokes something in you and gives me permission to say the second word and makes you want to hear the third word? So I take this down to that granular level. This is especially important, like on Instagrams and things like this. I was in a training session with Facebook, and one of the things that they brought up was that today the thumb rules, right? Because we are on our mobile devices, right? And our thumbs are making choices, right? So, we can have like all this crazy content out there that in that type of platform, people aren't even going to pay attention to. So how do you drill this down? How do you craft this type of simple message? How do you catch their attention early in this? Because we put all this time and energy into our messaging and these gorgeous images and things that we put out there. But if we don't find a way to capture their attention early and reel them in, we're going to lose them, and all of that's wasted. Again, the inverted funnel takes them from word to word to word to paragraph, and it makes them. We want it to be to a point where they're asking us for more content, not that we've got their hands behind and holding them hostage with our content, right? They're like this, pulling a rope. Tell me more. How do you start? Very simple, but say it in such a way that it makes them want more and more of what you're having to say. Now you're into persuasion, right? Because they're asking you, tell me more. I want to know more. I think a connection is extremely important as well. I talk about that in the book as well. Like, how do we make a connection with other people? It's extremely important, with millennials, but with everyone as well. How do you create that situation where they really do like you? Right?
People buy from people they like.
That's exactly right. So how do you make that connection? Things like humor is a great way to make a connection. Like, when I speak professionally, I try to get people laughing. I do some stand-up work as well. It's extremely important to have them laugh with you, right? You bond over that laughing. Compassion, right? People may be purchasing a home out of a tragic situation. They may be downsizing because of a divorce, or they may be downsizing because of a death. Can you have compassion with their story and listen to them and really care about them, having empathy where you really feel this yourself? If it's a couple, again, going through a divorce, how do you feel the pain that person is going through? That's a great way to make a connection there. Storytelling as well is a great way to make connections there. Making sure that you have this moment, this aha moment of truth. Can you craft a story around a neighborhood? Absolutely. Especially if you're doing a lot of green building as well. Can you craft a story, a narrative around that? Absolutely. You can. But making sure that you have this meaning that you're pointing to as well. We've talked about authenticity as well. It's another way to make connections there with people. How about this? What about just asking people questions? Like allowing them to tell their story, allowing to get them out of it. We talked about this earlier about making mistakes. Being transparent about mistakes that you've made is a great way to connect with buyers there. And
so speaking of making mistakes, so say going back to the reviews, for example, if you have a negative review, what would you recommend we do? Because some people are so quick to want to delete it versus going back and comment and addressing it. So how would you handle that?
Sure. I think the first question I would ask is it true?
Mm-hmm. So say it's true. Say,
it's true.
Sometimes, right, there's customers that you're not going to please for whatever reason. Things happen, right? Maybe the building process wasn't as smooth. Maybe there was some kind of a miscommunication, misunderstanding, and at the end, they're not happy.
Sure. Well, I don't think that I have purchased several homes, lots of homes, dozens of homes. I've built tons of homes. There's never been a situation where there wasn't something that did come up, something that did happen. I'm fine with that. I expect that. I know it's going to happen. That doesn't bother me. So what?
You're a ideal customer, because you know what? It's fun because I think and I think it's maybe with the rise of HGTV that people oversimplify the building process.
Oh my gosh!
They
it's done in 60 minutes.
Exactly. Like this happens, but they cut out all the issues that they came across, all the stuff that happened. And so when you run into those issues, it's like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this is happening. And it's, it's, they're flabbergasted, and it's like, what do you expect? Like, this is a building process. And it's shocking to me how many customers are not expecting issues to come up. And I think, of course, it's our job as the sales reps to make sure that we're prefacing and that we're positioning this, that, hey, it's not going to be maybe the smoothest process, and this is very normal, and this is going to happen, and it's to expect this.
Manage the expectations, right? Yeah. Manage them up front. And I think like what people look for in reviews, and I think to me personally, what I look for in a review isn't did something go bad, because things do happen. What I care about on the other side, as someone who purchases, what I care about is, how did you respond in that situation? How did you handle the situation? Did you acknowledge it? Did you work through it? Did you find a solution? I mean, I make mistakes. We all know it's going to happen, but to your point of managing it up front, letting them know this is normal. These things are going to happen throughout. But what I want you to know is that if something comes up, I'm here. I'm present. We're going to figure this out together, and I'm going to do the very best I can to make sure that we're both happy in this situation, because it's going to happen. Not if things are going to happen.
Absolutely.
We're all human.
And so I think one of the biggest mistakes that most people make in communicating, and tell me if I'm wrong here or not, but we make assumptions. We assume. We assume that the other person is on the same page with us. We assume that the other person have had similar experiences as us. We assume that it's clear, that it's obvious.
Yes.
What's the next step in buying a house? It's obvious.
But it's not.
It's in the brochure. It's obvious.
Yeah.
When you sign that purchase agreement, what's the next step? It's obvious. It's in the 42-page contract you just signed. It's obvious. So I think that's where a lot of things arise, where it could be problematic, because we assume. So how can we, break that down, where we're not making assumptions, but we also don't want to be so ridiculously repetitive that we annoy the other person. So is there trick words, or does this make sense? Is it kind of a check-in point that, are we on the same page? How do we communicate without over-communicating to them, but at the same time making sure we don't make those assumptions?
Yeah, a few things here. So first of all, sometimes it feels like we're over communicating because we're talking to like on the linear path, we're talking to so many different buyers. So we feel like we're saying the same thing over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. But keep in mind, for that one person, it's the first time they've heard that. So that's new information to them. And so we have to walk through, but we can also like ask clarifying questions as well, and not just yes, no questions, but ask questions that demand more response out of the buyers, for example, to make sure, and that gives them a chance to talk, right? And to share, what they're thinking through that. But it makes sense. Like you look at a beautiful model home, and then you look at a piece of dirt, and it's like, all right, boom, from here to here. All right, boom, there it is.
There it is.
What's so hard about this? But going back, I think too, like knowing your buyer is one thing. I have to know my customers. I have to know my clients. Some people need me to over communicate, and that's how I keep the relationship the way it is. Other people are more just high level. Just give me the high level, what I need to know from step 1 to step 2, step 3. I've got all this other stuff going. I'm trusting you. I'm okay with that. So I don't think it's like a one size fits all. I don't think there's a silver bullet in any of this. I think it's really understanding your client, your customer here that you're working with, and what do they need to make this process simpler for them.
Yes, and I love that you bring up an excellent point, that it's not just about how you communicate to them and how much information you're providing, but it's also what method of communication, knowing your client. So for millennials, it may be more emails. For baby boomers, it may be more phone calls, right? Because millennials going to look at this thing and say,
why is it ringing? What's wrong with my phone? It's vibrating. What's wrong? Stop it.
Me, right? So, what's going on here? So you're so right. It is going back to knowing your customer and knowing how they want to be communicated to, that will help you with that process. So,
and it might not just be millennials. I'm not a millennial, but I'm the same way. I would much rather you text me than to call, because a lot of times I'm in meetings or I'm here and there, and it's a lot easier for me just to respond to something. You know, those around me have learned too, like when you text me, you don't put 4 questions in a single text, because no matter how many questions you put in a text, you're going to get one answer, and that's all you're going to get. So let's just take these one at a time. Again, I point to like knowing your customer, knowing how they work. Do they like to hear from you? Is it comforting to them to hear your voice? Is it reassuring to them to hear your voice? If they get a text or they think, well, she doesn't really care about me, she just texted me that information. You know the person. You know, some people like you to post on their Facebook wall, hey, look, check this out, here's what's happened today, isn't this exciting? Like just kind of knowing them. And I think that happens up front. You know, when we talked about like understanding their win and what they want, understanding them and how they like to communicate. Because again, there's not a silver bullet. There's no one size fits all.
And maybe it could be as simple as at the purchase contract, you ask them, hey, when something comes up, how do I communicate with you? And hopefully by then you've established enough relationship of going back and forth that you got to the contract that you know exactly how they want to be communicated to.
You'll also know too if they don't respond. Like if you try texting, they don't respond, and then you have to end up calling. You kind of learn that. And you know, and brevity as well. You know, I talk some in my book about like if you are doing emails and things like that, you should like using bullet points, allowing lots of white space and visual space there in the communication. I know for me, like if I get an email that's got 10 paragraphs in it, I'm going to read the first one, a little bit in the middle, I'm gonna read and it's done. I'm not going to go through all that. But if I see bullet points, I can scan that really quickly, even if it's just an update of, hey, look, here's what's happened in the last few days, boom, 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 here's where we are, boom, 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 here's what's next, boom, boom, boom. I can take a look at that in 5 seconds. I get the gist of what you're saying. Am I going to read 10 paragraphs?
No. So yeah, so important to know your customer, know how to communicate with them, and the way of communicating with them. Speaking of the way of communicating with you, Jeff, so if we want to pick up a copy of your book and we want to connect with you, how do we do that?
So you're welcome to check out my website. It's jefftippett.com, JEFFTIPPETT.com. There's a place you can sign up for email notifications there. And as we're ready, one of the things I'm doing out right now is each week we're rolling out bits and pieces of different chapters of my book. So that's a possibility for people to sign up. If they want an instant chapter, they can simply text the word persuade to 66866. And a free chapter of my book will come out on messaging and how to craft a simple message for your audience. So that's a way to stay in touch. And I'm on all the social sites. You can follow me on Twitter, connect me on LinkedIn. Love to have conversations.
Now Instagram, huh?
Instagram. I'm Instagram too. I'm Jeff Tippett on Instagram.
Okay.
Yes, I'm everywhere. I love
millennials there.
I'm right there as well.
Awesome. And Jeff, besides your book, is there any other projects or any events coming up for you that you'd like to tell us about?
Right now, my big focus is on my book. You know, I speak professionally, so about half my time I'm out on stage, and I'm also leading seminars and workshops. And then half my time I'm working with clients and customers. So right now, my focus is on this book. I've got to the end of September to finish these last 4 chapters. I'm there. So. And we have an election coming up, and I'm leading a big ballot initiative. So I'm like, right now I'm balancing all this out. So, but getting this book off my plate and totally over into the hands of my publisher and my editor, that's my number 1 job right now.
Yeah, you got it. So good luck to you with that. I can't wait to get a copy of my book. I'm definitely going to sign up. And thank you so much for being a guest today. I really appreciate you and your energy. And I think we can all take away some very valuable information from today and figure out what's the best way to communicate, what's the most effective way to communicate, and what's the best channel to do it. And it goes back to knowing your customer. So
absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
I can't wait to talk to you about your next book when it comes out. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.